Hi guys, today we're talking about references. In order to demonstrate how to use a reference, I'm first going to create an example based on what we covered so far. We covered functions and classes. So I'm going to create a simple class. Whoa, did not need that. Class, let's call it person. To simplify, we're going to have one public variable called name. And in fact, I'm going to set it to something like Adam. And we're going to change it to Bob later on. Suppose we have a function to do that called update name, which takes our person object and then simply sets its name to Bob. So whenever we call this function, we're going to set the person's name to Bob. So, right, let's create our object. Person P, and we're now going to call our newly created function update name with our person P. And as we see here, its name is going to be updated to Bob. So let's print that and see that it is true. So we'll use the standard cout and line. Now, before you run this, it's a good exercise if you're learning to kind of predict what's going to happen, because the more you do it, the easier it will be to realign your mental model of the program and the program's model, so that in the future, once you've done this exercise enough times, you'll be able to run the program even in your head, because you'll be familiar with the syntax, you'll be familiar with the domain. It should be reasonably easy to do that. So we were expecting it to change to Bob. Is it going to happen though? It still prints Adam. How come, right? We did this, we created our person object, we passed it to this function called update name, and clearly it sets the name of this person to Bob. Now in Java, this would have worked. But in C++, there is a slightly different mechanic called pass by copy or pass by value. So by default, if you don't specify anything, and we didn't, if you're passing something into a function, this something is going to be copied. So we actually have two person type objects here. One is P, which is in this scope, and one is called person. So person and P are not the same thing, which is where the issue lies. So now it is pretty much obvious that because we have two different person objects, changing a property of one does not change the property of the other. And that should be just obvious from common sense, really. If you're just think in the real world, if you have two identical chairs, you suddenly decide to break one of them, the other doesn't break, right? Just automatically. You have to also break the other one. Or if you want to paint one chair, the other chair doesn't get painted the same color as the first one. So just use common sense when it comes to copies. And here we have P, which is one object, and person, which is the other. So we're going to use references now to make sure that the thing that we're passing in is the thing that gets inside this function. I'll simplify some things, but in general, just think of references as being able to pass the same object without any copying involved. So, like we said earlier, P gets copied into person. Person is a completely different object, therefore nothing changes. And before we add reference, let's just do this over here so that we can confirm that this object's name is in fact Bob. And it is correct. First of all, this gets called, which says Bob. Then this gets called, which says Adam. Now, to make this pass by reference, all you need to do is add this symbol, which is called the ampersand, the AND symbol, if you will. And that's all it takes to tell C++ that we want to pass this same object without creating any copies. So now, in your code, there is only one person. It has two variable names, if you think of it that way, that they both refer to the same thing, which is great, because that's what you have in Java. And now we have two Bobs, because in fact it's the same Bob. So we have one person, we called update name on that person, we change that person's name, and since there's only one person that we have, obviously it's going to be Bob 2 times. Right, so the task for this video is for you to create an item class. So something like this. And keeping with the simplicity theme here, add just two variables to that class, name and description, and do something similar to what we've done here. So create a function that doesn't belong to a class. Although it should, if you're kind of thinking from the object-oriented perspective. This is wrong when it comes to object-oriented perspective. You don't normally do this. You'd create a function that belongs to a class to update the name, or in particular set name and get name functions and so on. But we're focusing on references here, so it's fine to create a standalone function that takes an item and updates its name and description. And you might also want to create more items, not just one, and just play around with references until you're very happy with what reference can do for you in C++. And then in the next video, we'll cover something somewhat similar in terms of functionality, but conceptually it's entirely different, and it will be pointers. Right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.